My husband demanded a divorce, clueless that I earned $450,000. He sneered, I refuse to be tied to a lazy, worthless woman. Later, he married my best friend, only to choke on his own arrogance when he discovered my success. The look on his face? Priceless. Ashley Miller had mastered the art of staying unseen. To the neighbors on Maplewood Lane, she was a polite, well-kept woman in her mid-30s, usually spotted tending her backyard garden or walking her dog at sunset. To her co-workers, most of whom lived in other states or countries, she was a sharp, reliable data analyst who never missed a deadline and rarely spoke beyond what the job required. But to her husband Derek, Ashley was little more than an accessory to his image, a quiet, dutiful wife who made coffee just the way he liked it and never asked too many questions. In their suburban home just outside Arlington, Virginia, appearances were everything. Derek, a real estate agent with a fondness for flashy watches and self-help podcasts, built his personality around success, even if much of it was curated. He often reminded Ashley of how lucky she was to have him, how hard he worked, how exhausting it was to carry the family on his back. Ashley never corrected him. She never mentioned that her salary, which came from a remote position at a global analytics firm, far surpassed his commission checks. She never explained the quarterly bonuses that quietly landed in her separate account, or the stock options she had been accruing for years. Her financial independence was complete and invisible. She had chosen to keep it that way, not out of fear, but out of a strange loyalty to peace. It seemed easier to let Derek believe his illusion. He loved playing the provider. He called himself the alpha, tossed the word grind around like a badge of honor, and once told their dinner guests that Ashley wasn't the ambitious type, but that's okay, she makes a mean pot roast. Everyone had laughed. Ashley had smiled. Inside, something had shifted. She had grown used to the small humiliations, being cut off mid-sentence, having her ideas repeated louder by Derek at barbecues, watching him exaggerate the price of everything they owned. At first, it was amusing. Then, tolerable. Then, exhausting. They had met in college. Derek was loud, charismatic, magnetic in the way insecure men often are, desperate to prove something. He had chased her, wooed her with promises of partnership and adventure. Back then, he had seemed bold. Now, he just seemed loud. Ashley had changed. Derek hadn't. Their conversations had dwindled into logistics, dinner plans, vet appointments, dry cleaning. He no longer asked about her projects. She stopped mentioning them altogether. Even when her team was recognized in a European tech journal for their predictive model, she didn't bring it up. She wasn't sure he'd understand, and worse, she wasn't sure he'd care. Derek liked things he could measure: square footage, car horsepower, social media followers. Ashley worked in variables, uncertainty, data that revealed more than what was obvious. They were no longer speaking the same language. And yet, from the outside, they looked fine. Their photos showed smiles at wine tastings, posed brunches, coordinated outfits at Christmas. Ashley had curated the illusion as much as Derek had, but for different reasons. He needed admiration. She needed quiet. In her office upstairs, the one Derek jokingly called the hobby room, Ashley handled multi-million-dollar datasets, collaborated with engineers in 3 time zones, and conducted Zoom meetings that decided the direction of entire platforms. She wore jeans and cardigans, never makeup. She liked it that way. She knew things couldn't stay like this forever. Not because she was miserable, she wasn't. Not entirely. But because she felt something dormant in her slowly begin to wake up. It started with a thought one Tuesday morning as she reviewed a proposal from the innovation team. What would happen if I said no? Not to them. To everything. To the pretending. To the passive agreement. To Derek. The question lingered as she watered the garden that evening. It followed her into the kitchen, where Derek criticized her for not buying the right kind of coffee filters. It hovered as he scrolled on his phone during dinner, nodding absently while she tried to tell him about a new team lead from Singapore. That night, Ashley sat on the edge of their bed, her laptop open beside her. A notification blinked, another stock grant approved. Her net worth had officially crossed $450,000. She stared at the number without feeling anything. Not pride. Not surprise. Just clarity. She could leave whenever she wanted. The realization wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no inner monologue about freedom or betrayal. Just a simple acknowledgement that the cage had never been locked, and maybe never even real. She had just chosen to stay. Until now. She closed the laptop, walked to the bathroom, and began removing her makeup with slow, deliberate movements. Derek was already snoring, sprawled across the bed like a man who believed himself king of a castle. Ashley looked at him for a moment, then turned off the light. Invisible, yes. But not for long. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a pale light over the granite countertops. Ashley stood barefoot near the stove, her robe tied loosely around her waist, stirring oatmeal absent-mindedly. The silence in the room was comforting, broken only by the occasional clink of the spoon against the pot. It was a Saturday, and the routine felt familiar, almost ritualistic. For a brief moment, Ashley let herself enjoy it. The quiet before the inevitable. She didn't hear Derek coming down the stairs. His presence arrived in the form of his cologne and the hard sound of his shoes on the hardwood floor. He didn't greet her. He never did anymore. He simply moved through the house like he owned the air in it. He walked to the coffee machine, pressed the button with an annoyed grunt, and then leaned against the counter opposite her. Ashley could feel the weight of his eyes, not curious, not admiring, just calculating. "I've been thinking," he said flatly. She didn't look up. He took a sip of coffee, grimaced, and set the mug down with more force than necessary. "I'm done." Ashley blinked. "Done? With this? Us? This whole arrangement?" His voice was clipped, rehearsed even. "I can't keep dragging a woman through life who has no drive, no passion, no ambition. You just exist." She stared at him now, really seeing him. The crisp polo shirt, the designer belt, the carefully styled hair. A man who had constructed himself like a storefront window, appealing from afar, empty behind the glass. "You're serious," she said calmly. "I've never been more serious. You don't challenge me. You don't build with me. I need someone who wants more." Ashley's first instinct was to laugh, but the absurdity of the moment held her still. She placed the spoon down gently, turned off the stove, and faced him fully. Her eyes were steady, almost serene. "Okay," she said. The word hung between them like smoke. Derek's expression faltered for a second. He had expected resistance. Maybe tears. Maybe a meltdown. What he got was worse, composure. "That's it?" he asked. Ashley nodded. "You want a divorce? I won't fight you." Derek's mouth twitched. He wasn't used to not winning. "I thought you'd at least want to talk it through." "There's nothing to talk about if your mind's made up." He shifted his weight, the false confidence cracking just a little. "It's not personal, Ash. I need to grow. And I can't do that with someone who's content being average." Ashley tilted her head. "Is that what you think I am?" He shrugged. "You're comfortable. You don't push yourself. You don't dream big." She almost pitied him. The self-delusion ran so deep he couldn't see the truth even when it stood inches away. She wondered what he would say if she told him the figures in her investment account, the leadership board she served on in Europe, the fact that 3 companies had tried to recruit her in the last 6 months alone. But she said none of it. He didn't deserve to know. "Then I guess you should find someone who matches your vision," she said softly. Derek straightened, as if reassured by her lack of resistance. "I will. I already have, actually." Ashley's chest tightened, not from heartbreak, but from recognition. She should have expected this. The distance, the attitude shift, the late nights out. He hadn't fallen out of love, he had simply found someone else. She didn't ask who. She didn't care. Derek grabbed his coffee and headed toward the hallway, calling back over his shoulder, "I'll get the paperwork started. I'll be staying at a friend's for now." She watched him disappear, heard the door slam a moment later. The silence that returned was colder than before, but it was hers. No more performance. No more eggshells. She moved through the house methodically, as if on instinct. She gathered laundry. She washed dishes. She opened windows and let the late summer breeze in. Each task grounded her in a strange sense of liberation. The marriage was ending, not with drama, not with tears, but with clarity. She called her lawyer that afternoon. By evening, she had already begun making lists, things to sell, accounts to update, passwords to change. It was not grief that drove her. It was motion. For years, she had been stationary. Now she was a tide. That night, she slept alone in the king-sized bed, diagonally, taking up all the space. The silence no longer felt like a punishment. The next morning, she woke before sunrise, put on her running shoes, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the street empty. With each stride, she felt the weight of his contempt fall away, piece by piece. She ran harder than she had in years. Not from anything. Toward something. 3 days later, she sat in her office, hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes scanning a proposal from a partner team in Berlin. Her manager messaged her during the call, "Still considering the VP offer? We'd love to make it official." She smiled, just slightly, and typed back, "Let's talk next week." At lunch, she met with her financial advisor. They reviewed her updated portfolio, factoring in the upcoming legal split. "You're in an excellent position," the advisor said. "You won't need to change a thing." Ashley nodded. "I'm not changing anything. I'm just starting to live." That evening, she passed by the bedroom Derek once insisted be painted calming gray to match his aesthetic. She opened the door, took one long look, then shut it again. There was nothing calming about pretending. By the end of the week, her lawyer confirmed that Derek had formally filed. She received the documents without emotion, signed them in minutes, and returned them by courier. There were no long emails. No desperate texts. Just finality. It wasn't until the following Monday that the first crack appeared in Derek's mask. He texted her, "Hope you're okay." She didn't respond. An hour later, "Maybe we should talk before everything's finalized." Still no reply. By dusk, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Ashley set her phone face down and returned to her book. Derek's words no longer held power. His opinion of her, small, misguided, arrogant, had evaporated in the heat of its own foolishness. What he called ambition was noise. What she had was vision. Quiet, deliberate, unshakable. The contempt he had weaponized was now a mirror, showing only his own insecurity. She was no longer invisible. And she would never be average again. Ashley had just stepped out of her apartment building when the message came through. It was from Jenna, an old classmate from college who now worked as a journalist in Richmond. They hadn't spoken in nearly a year. The message was short, just a link and 4 words, "You've seen this, right?" Ashley paused on the sidewalk, sunlight warming her arms. She clicked the link, half expecting an article or perhaps an announcement from their alumni group. Instead, her browser loaded a Facebook post. A photograph. There was Derek, arm in arm with Lauren. Lauren Hastings. Ashley's best friend since sophomore year. Her college roommate. The one who held her hair back when she was sick. The one who cried on her shoulder during a brutal breakup. The one who made speeches at Ashley's bridal shower, who toasted her with cheap champagne the night before the wedding. Now grinning in a wine bar, leaning into Derek's chest, her manicured hand on his collar. Ashley stared at the image. It didn't look like a secret. They weren't hiding. Derek had tagged himself. Lauren had commented under the photo with a heart. The caption read, new chapters, same happiness. It wasn't rage that hit first. It was the hollowed-out sensation of something slipping out of reach, not a person, not even a friendship, but a version of the past she thought had meant something. All the late-night conversations, the loyalty, the unspoken sisterhood, it had all been paper-thin. The second wave was something colder. A kind of clarity. She remembered now, Lauren had grown oddly distant in the last year. Texts went unanswered. Plans always had to be rescheduled. Ashley had chalked it up to work stress or relationship drama. She hadn't suspected Derek, not seriously. Not until now. She locked her phone and kept walking. Her steps were slower, her face impassive. Inside, her mind moved like a machine, taking inventory of every moment that now appeared in a different light. 2 weeks later, the gossip had made its way into their old college group chat. Ashley didn't respond to the side messages. She didn't dignify the curiosity with a public statement. But she saw the reactions. Most were subtle, awkward silence, changing subjects. A few, like Jenna, sent quiet sympathy. 1 or 2 outright said what others wouldn't, "That's low, even for him." Ashley didn't need their validation. But it confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misstep. It was betrayal in its most calculated form. Lauren had always admired Derek, Ashley remembered that now, with uncomfortable clarity. She had once called him annoyingly charming. Ashley had laughed at the time, brushing it off. But the signs had been there. Too much attention. Too much praise. And now, too little shame. Derek didn't reach out. Neither did Lauren. The silence was strategic. They had made their choice and were gambling that Ashley's quiet nature would prevent a storm. That she'd fade into the background, as she always had. What they didn't realize was that Ashley's silence no longer came from passivity. It came from control. She focused on her work. Her promotion offer was now on the table in formal terms, Vice President of Global Data Strategy. A new salary package, full relocation options, and a budget under her direct authority that could rival entire departments. She signed without hesitation. On her first day under the new title, her assistant handed her an envelope marked "Personal." Inside was a handwritten note from the CEO, congratulating her and inviting her to speak at the company's European Summit in Amsterdam. She smiled. This was the life she had built. Quietly. Deliberately. Without needing applause. 2 weeks after her promotion, she ran into Lauren. It was at a boutique grocery store downtown, the kind with overpriced candles and organic almond milk. Ashley was browsing the wine section when she heard the unmistakable pitch of Lauren's voice behind her. She turned, slowly. Lauren froze for half a second, then forced a smile. She looked polished, styled, trying to give off the air of someone who belonged wherever she went. But Ashley could see it, the flicker of nervousness behind her eyes. "Ash," she said, as if greeting an old friend. Ashley's voice was steady. "Lauren." They stood in silence for a beat. Lauren tucked a lock of hair behind her ear. "Wow. It's been a while." Ashley gave a small nod. "It has." "I didn't know you shopped here," Lauren added, grasping for casualness. Ashley glanced at the bottle in her hand. "Just moved nearby." Lauren's mouth parted slightly. "You moved?" "I did." Ashley looked her over once. It was time for something better. Lauren cleared her throat. "Look, I know this is awkward. I didn't plan for things to happen the way they did. But Derek and I, things just happened." Ashley let the pause linger. "You mean while I was still married to him?" Lauren flinched, but tried to recover. "It wasn't like that. We reconnected after." "You don't need to explain," Ashley interrupted, her voice low and firm. "I'm not interested in the timeline." Lauren swallowed, searching for a softer angle. "I just hope we can still be, not enemies." Ashley almost laughed, but didn't. She set the wine in her basket. "We're not enemies, Lauren. That would require effort. You're just someone I used to know." Lauren looked like she wanted to say more, but Ashley had already turned away. She walked to the register with unhurried grace, her back straight, her silence final. That night, she received an invitation to speak at a private Women in Tech roundtable in New York. It would be a closed event, attended by leaders from Google, IBM, and a few high-profile venture capitalists. Ashley accepted immediately. Her life had evolved into something so far removed from Derek's world that she almost forgot how small his aspirations had been. He had wanted praise. She had created legacy. Weeks later, a colleague mentioned seeing Derek and Lauren at a local restaurant, acting like reality TV characters. He laughed about it. Ashley didn't comment. She didn't need to. The betrayal had done more than end friendships. It had sharpened her understanding of who she was, and who she would never be again. No more shrinking. No more concessions. Let them enjoy their illusion. Ashley had moved on to something real. The keys felt unfamiliar in her hand, sleek, modern, heavier than expected. As Ashley stepped into her new apartment, the sound of the door clicking shut behind her echoed louder than she anticipated. It was the first time in years that silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like ownership. The loft in Washington, D.C. was everything her former life had never allowed her to imagine openly. Floor-to-ceiling windows spilled daylight across polished concrete floors. The kitchen was lined with matte black cabinetry and brass fixtures. A minimalist glass desk faced the city skyline, and next to it, an empty wall waited for the bookshelf she'd always wanted but never had room, or permission, for. Ashley set the keys on the kitchen counter and walked slowly through each room, letting her fingers brush over surfaces. There was no one to ask her why she needed a second bedroom, no one to mock the idea of hanging abstract art, no one to argue over the placement of furniture. She was free to choose. Free to exist. The car came next. She had spent years driving an economical hybrid, efficient, understated, Derek approved. Now, she sat behind the wheel of a graphite gray electric coupe with adaptive tech, 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, and a leather interior that smelled like authority. She didn't tell anyone she bought it. She didn't need to. That same week, Ashley officially accepted the promotion. Her title now included the words, Global Strategy, and with it came not just a significant salary boost but autonomy. Real autonomy. She was now managing cross-continental teams, setting project goals, deciding which technologies would define the company's future in artificial intelligence and data science. Her name was suddenly being mentioned in leadership forums, her email forwarding inboxes that used to be above her pay grade. Her calendar filled quickly. Weekly calls with the team in Singapore. Bi-monthly check-ins with the Paris office. Invitations to contribute to panels on diversity in tech. One morning she woke to a message from a women-led VC firm in San Francisco asking if she would be open to sitting on an advisory board. She hadn't even updated her LinkedIn profile yet. And still, Ashley remained quiet about it all. She posted nothing on social media. No photos of her apartment. No brags about her promotion. She did not need validation from a digital audience, and certainly not from people who had underestimated her. Her wins belonged to her now. One afternoon, she walked through her building's shared rooftop lounge, laptop under one arm, coffee in the other. The space was half full, young professionals on calls, a few couples working remotely side by side. A man in his 40s gave her a polite nod as she passed. No one knew her history. No one expected her to explain her presence. She was just another successful woman in the city. And that anonymity? It was a gift. Later that week, her assistant forwarded a request from an international tech conference. They wanted Ashley to be the keynote speaker for their upcoming summit in Lisbon. The organizer described her career as a masterclass in silent power. Ashley smiled at the phrase. She accepted with only one condition: no pre-interview, no press. At home, she began unpacking pieces of her past. She framed her old university certificate, not for nostalgia, but for closure. She donated everything that reminded her of Derek. Clothing he liked, books he pretended to read, even wedding gifts still boxed in the garage. She wanted no residue of that life. Only what came next. In one of her weekend strolls through Georgetown, she passed a boutique design studio and was drawn to a painting in the window. It was bold, chaotic swirls of crimson and navy over a stormy gray base. Something about it unsettled her, but she couldn't stop looking. An hour later, it was being delivered to her apartment. She hung it across from her desk, a reminder that not all beauty is calm, and not all storms are to be feared. As her outer world expanded, her inner one shifted too. She reconnected with old colleagues from conferences, people who had admired her quiet work ethic but now saw her in a different light. They didn't treat her like a surprise success. They treated her like an equal. One evening, she joined a dinner for tech leaders hosted at a Michelin-starred restaurant in downtown DC. Seated between a cybersecurity executive and a NASA researcher, she contributed to a discussion on machine learning ethics. When the host raised a toast to the future of leadership, eyes turned toward her. Ashley simply nodded. No need to explain. No need to impress. She was already where she belonged. On her way home, she walked past a familiar boutique and saw a handbag in the window, a limited edition piece she once admired but never considered buying. It was expensive, unnecessary, indulgent. She bought it anyway. Not to flaunt it. To own the fact that she could. In the weeks that followed, Ashley began mentoring 2 younger women in her department. They were smart, ambitious, and full of the same hesitation she once carried. She didn't preach to them. She simply listened, offered tools, and reminded them that quiet does not mean weak. At night, her apartment remained silent. But now, the silence was laced with something else, contentment. She read more. She slept better. She had begun to dream again, not of escape, but of expansion. Ashley wasn't starting from scratch. She was building from strength. She wasn't trying to prove Derek wrong. She was finally proving herself right. The ballroom shimmered with carefully curated elegance. Crystal chandeliers bathed the space in warm light, while a subtle hum of conversations filled the air. Ashley stood near the edge of the stage, microphone clipped discreetly to her blouse, the event coordinator whispering last-minute timing cues into her ear. It was the second day of the Chicago Future Tech Forum, a closed-door summit attended by a few hundred industry leaders. Her keynote was slotted just before the closing panel, a prime spot. She hadn't asked for it. The committee had insisted. She sipped water from a sleek glass bottle and glanced toward the audience beginning to take their seats. Rows of executives, startup founders, researchers, and journalists, many of whom she had only ever known through email chains or conference panels. Here, she wasn't just seen, she was expected. The moment came without warning. "Hey, Ashley, right?" She turned to see a man approaching from the side, holding a lanyard that identified him as a guest from another tech firm. Early 40s, tailored blazer, casual confidence. He smiled. "I don't know if you remember me. Tom Barrett? Derek's old college buddy. We met once, years ago, at your house." Ashley offered a professional nod. "I remember." Tom grinned. "Small world, huh? Didn't realize you were the Ashley M. on the program. I saw your name on the agenda and thought, no way it's the same person. But then I saw you up there during the AI panel yesterday. You crushed it, by the way." "Thanks," she said, keeping her tone measured. Tom laughed, shaking his head. Man, Derek had no idea. He used to talk like he was carrying you, you know? The stay-at-home type. But here you are, keynote speaker, running circles around half these guys. Ashley didn't reply. The coordinator motioned toward the stage, signaling that she had 90 seconds. She turned back to Tom. "Nice seeing you again," she said smoothly. "Enjoy the talk." And with that, she stepped onto the stage, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The crowd hushed as the lights shifted. Behind her, the giant screen projected her name in clean, bold font, Ashley Miller, VP, Global Strategy, Stratix AI Solutions. By the time she reached the podium, the room had gone completely still. She began with poise, her voice even, each sentence precise and unhurried. She wove through trends in machine learning, ethical implementation models, and global data strategy with a clarity that didn't demand attention, it earned it. She had no need for theatrics. The room stayed locked in. 25 minutes later, the applause was long and sincere. Backstage, Ashley returned to the green room to find her phone buzzing with notifications. Messages from coworkers. Mentions in live tweets. Congratulations from LinkedIn connections she hadn't spoken to in years. And one message stood out. It was from Tom. A photo of her on stage, taken from his seat. Caption, Ashley M., dominating the stage like no one else. Posted publicly. Ashley froze for only a second. The post had been liked by several people already, including names she recognized from Derek's old circle. The implications were immediate. Derek would see it. She didn't need to guess. He followed Tom religiously. The man had once said, "If Tom buys a stock, I buy the stock." There was no version of this post not reaching him. Ashley slipped her phone back into her bag and calmly returned to the networking floor, unbothered. Her name was no longer hidden. Her accomplishments were no longer shadowed by domestic illusions. She had stepped into the light, and there was no going back. 2 days later, while packing for her return to DC, she saw the message. Unknown number. Just one word, wow. She ignored it. A second message followed. I saw your talk. Tom shared it. Didn't know you were doing all that. No name. No apology. No acknowledgement of the silence. She let the message sit unread. Back in DC, Ashley resumed her schedule. Meetings, interviews, advisory calls. Her story, the version she had built without Derek's interference, was finally visible. And the reaction wasn't just praise, it was curiosity. That weekend, she received an invitation to an exclusive VC dinner in Manhattan. A partner at a global investment firm wanted to meet with her about a think tank initiative for women in AI governance. Ashley RSVP'd yes. Meanwhile, the online buzz continued. Clips from her keynote circulated in small tech circles, shared with captions like, "Proof that leadership doesn't always shout," or, "The real power players in data are women like this." Ashley's inbox swelled with invitations. Podcasts. Panels. Executive interviews. She accepted only a handful. Enough to stay relevant, not enough to become a spectacle. A week later, while reviewing strategy proposals in her office, her assistant poked in, holding a handwritten note. No sender listed, she said. Ashley opened it and immediately recognized Derek's handwriting. 2 sentences, written in blue ink. I never really saw you, did I? I'm sorry. She placed the note inside a drawer without comment. There was no need to reply. Later that night, as she looked out from her apartment window, the city glowed beneath her. A soft, steady light. She stood there for a long moment, watching the slow swirl of cars below, the quiet pulse of her own reflection in the glass. In another life, Derek might have tried to dim her light. But now, there was nothing left for him to grasp. She hadn't just rebuilt. She had risen, so far beyond his reach that all he could do was watch. The glossy illusion that Derek had constructed was beginning to splinter. At first, the cracks were subtle, missed credit card payments, awkward glances at menus, his hesitation before offering to split the bill when dining out with friends. Lauren didn't notice at first. She was too enthralled with the version of Derek that had swept her off her feet, the confident, image-obsessed man who had promised her a lifestyle built on ambition and bold decisions. He wore tailored suits, drove a leased car he couldn't afford, and talked about market timing with the conviction of someone who had no idea how to read a financial report. But the act was harder to maintain when real bills replaced borrowed confidence. They had moved into a condo on the edge of town, one Lauren insisted on because of its floor-to-ceiling windows and concierge service. Derek had claimed he could make it work and had managed to bluff the down payment with help from a loan Lauren didn't know about yet. Within 2 months, his commission income began fluctuating wildly. Interest rates shifted. The housing market slowed. Derek's name no longer came up on sales leaderboards. And Lauren began asking questions. "What happened to the closing this week?" she asked one Thursday morning, glancing at the calendar posted in their kitchen. "The buyer's financing fell through," Derek replied, not looking up from his phone. "For the 3rd time this month? It happens. Market's weird right now." Lauren studied him. "You told me this year would be different. That we'd start saving for Europe. For the wedding." Derek bristled. "It's still happening." "When?" "You won't even talk to the planner anymore." "We're busy." "I'm busy." "You think I'm not trying?" Lauren didn't answer immediately. She poured her coffee slowly, calculating. She had left behind a job with stable benefits to build a future with Derek, a future that now felt like smoke and mirrors. The more she pushed, the more he snapped. One night, after another silent dinner, she opened his laptop while he was in the shower. What she found didn't surprise her, it confirmed what she had started to suspect. Unpaid credit card balances, overdue property taxes, and a spreadsheet titled, "Bridge Loan Options." A line item showed money transferred from a personal line of credit weeks before their trip to Charleston. When Derek emerged from the bathroom, towel slung around his waist, Lauren was waiting. "What is this?" she asked, holding up the screen. His jaw tightened. "You went through my files?" "You lied." "I didn't lie. I didn't tell you everything." "That's the same thing, Derek." He exhaled heavily, avoiding her gaze. "It's temporary. The market's coming back." Lauren's tone hardened. "I'm not stupid. You're overleveraged and behind on taxes. This isn't a dip. It's a collapse." Derek rubbed his face with both hands. "You don't get it. I'm building something here. But I had to take risks. That's how this works." Lauren laughed bitterly. "You mean pretending you're a success while burning through debt and using me as a cushion? That's not ambition. That's delusion." He moved to defend himself, but she was already walking away. Over the next few weeks, the tension turned suffocating. Their once curated Instagram presence dried up. No more brunches, no more weekend getaways, no more filtered sunsets with inspirational captions. Derek's phone calls became shorter. Lauren started sleeping on the couch. The final blow came from a source neither expected. During a quiet afternoon, Lauren sat on the patio scrolling through her feed when a video caught her attention. It was from a tech news page she had followed for years. The caption read, "Ashley Miller delivers brutal truth about underestimated leadership." She paused. The name froze her in place. Ashley. She clicked, and the screen filled with footage of the keynote in Chicago. The video had already passed 10,000 views. Ashley stood confidently on stage, presenting data models with surgical clarity. Her voice was firm. Her expression unreadable. The applause at the end was thunderous. Lauren stared, mouth slightly open. She watched the video twice. Then went straight to Google. Within minutes, she was scanning articles, company press releases, thought leadership pieces authored by Ashley, her name attached to international strategy teams and award-winning initiatives. She even found a Forbes article listing Ashley as one of the top women reframing artificial intelligence in the global market. Lauren sat back in the chair, breathless. The realization hit all at once: Derek hadn't just left behind a quiet ex-wife. He had discarded a powerhouse. And he had never known. When Derek returned home later that evening, Lauren was waiting with her laptop open. Ashley's profile page on the StraightX website stared up at him. "You want to explain this?" she asked, voice low and sharp. Derek blinked. "What is it?" She's a tech executive. She earns more than you could in 5 years. You told me she didn't work. He hesitated. She didn't talk about it. I assumed. You assumed? You mean you never asked? Or you ignored it because it didn't fit the version of her you needed to believe in? She was never like this when we were together, he muttered. Lauren snapped the laptop shut. No, Derek. She was always like this. You just never saw it. They didn't speak again that night. The next morning, Lauren packed a small suitcase and left for her sister's house. She said she needed time, but Derek knew what that meant. He sat on the edge of their expensive couch in silence, the morning light catching the dust in the air. The condo was too quiet, too large for one person. Every echo reminded him of what he'd once dismissed as ordinary, now redefined by contrast. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a scene with shouting or tears. It was slow, silent, humiliating. The kind of unraveling that left no sympathy in its wake. And for the first time in months, Derek felt the truth settle over him in full. He hadn't traded up. He had simply stepped off a throne he never realized he was sitting on. Ashley was sitting on the terrace of a downtown cafe in D.C. when the message arrived. It was a crisp Sunday morning, her tablet open in front of her, the sun warming the metal railing. She had been reviewing the latest draft of a white paper on ethical data collection when her phone buzzed beside her latte. She glanced at the screen and stilled. From Derek, we need to talk. The message hung in the air like fog. No follow-up. No context. Just those 4 words, as if they held a weight only she could carry. Ashley stared at it for a long moment before returning to her work, untouched by the urgency he was clearly trying to manufacture. But something about the timing, the simplicity, intrigued her. She didn't answer immediately. She let a day pass. Then another. Only on Wednesday did she type a brief reply, tomorrow. 11 o'clock. Federal coffee. Come alone. The next morning, she arrived early and took a corner table facing the entrance. She wore a navy blazer over a soft gray blouse, hair pinned up, no effort made to soften her presence. There would be no confusion about who she was anymore. At 11 o'clock sharp, Derek walked in. He looked diminished. Not physically, his frame was the same, his hair still gelled with forced precision, but there was a noticeable shift in how he carried himself. Less arrogant, more uncertain. He spotted her, hesitated a second too long, then approached with a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ashley nodded once as he sat. She closed her tablet and folded her hands calmly. Thanks for meeting, he said, voice lower than usual. I wasn't sure you'd say yes. I almost didn't, she replied. What do you need? He fidgeted with the sleeve of his jacket. I wanted to talk. About everything. Ashley's expression didn't change. Be specific, Derek. What part of everything are we discussing? The divorce? Lauren? Your opinion of me? Or the part where you left me without asking a single real question about who I was? Derek exhaled. I deserve that. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He looked down at the table, then back at her. I made mistakes. Big ones. I thought I was doing what was right, what would make me happy. But I didn't see you. Not really. And now, I keep seeing your name everywhere. It's like, suddenly everyone else sees who you are, and I'm just realizing I never did. Ashley didn't flinch. You didn't want to. I know. And I'm sorry. There was a long silence. The cafe buzzed around them, conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, the occasional scrape of a chair. Ashley finally spoke, her voice measured. I used to think you were just careless. That maybe you were too wrapped up in your image to really understand who I was. But it wasn't that. You ignored what didn't fit your narrative. You chose not to see me. You needed to believe you were the savior, and I was the grateful, docile wife. Derek opened his mouth, but she held up a hand. You said I lacked ambition. That I was coasting. Meanwhile, I was earning $450,000 a year, leading global teams, and turning down promotions to preserve our so-called peace. You told yourself I was average so you wouldn't have to feel insecure next to me. And now that the world knows who I am, suddenly you're interested. He looked down, jaw tightening. Ashley stood slowly and placed a $20 bill on the table. This coffee's on me. Consider it closure. Derek looked up, startled. Wait, Ashley. Please. I'm not trying to fix anything. I just wanted to say it. You deserved better. She paused, then leaned slightly closer. You're right. I did. Then she turned and walked out, the door closing behind her with finality. Outside, the sun was higher now, bouncing off the glass towers of downtown. Ashley took a slow breath and walked toward the street. It wasn't vindication she felt. It wasn't triumph. It was the strange lightness that comes after a storm has passed and you realize the ground beneath you never cracked. Later that evening, Ashley attended a networking gala hosted by a think tank on women in STEM. The venue shimmered with soft lighting and laughter. She moved with ease between conversations, accepting compliments with grace, exchanging cards, sharing insights. The previous meeting with Derek had left no trace. She had compartmentalized it like an old file, labeled, stored, no longer active. Toward the end of the night, one of the keynote organizers approached her. We've been following your work for a while, the woman said. It's impressive. Not just the leadership, but how you've stayed grounded. We'd love for you to mentor some of our emerging researchers. Ashley smiled. I'd be honored. She spent the following week reviewing profiles of young women applying for the mentorship program. Among them were names from across the country, graduates from MIT, first-gen coders, recent immigrants with high aptitude and limited opportunity. Ashley saw echoes of herself in many of them. She chose 3. Each would receive direct guidance from her over the next 6 months, with bi-weekly calls and project collaboration opportunities. Her calendar adjusted accordingly. The confrontation with Derek became a fading dot in her rearview mirror. No further messages. No attempts to reconnect. It had been a moment, brief, necessary, conclusive. And more than that, it had been hers to close. Derek sat alone in the living room, the television casting faint light over his barely touched dinner. The condo felt cavernous now. Lauren hadn't returned since the confrontation. Her clothes were still in the closet, but her absence permeated every corner of the space. She had sent one message, I need time to think. That was nearly 3 weeks ago. He scrolled through his phone mindlessly, passing images of colleagues celebrating listings, old friends traveling abroad, and familiar names tied to unfamiliar success stories. Then her name appeared again, Ashley Miller. This time, in a retweet from an industry influencer praising her recent talk on AI compliance frameworks. He tapped the link, watched the video, then tapped another. They kept coming. One clip showed her speaking at a panel in Brussels, another in New York. She stood on stages in sleek dresses, her posture assured, her voice clear. Gone was the quiet woman he thought he'd known. In her place stood someone unshakable. Someone unforgettable. And all without ever raising her voice. The silence since their cafe meeting had spoken louder than anything she could have shouted. Derek had expected a response. Even hoped for one. A text. A call. A reaction. But she gave him nothing. Not a glance. Not a second chance. It became unbearable in its finality. What hurt the most wasn't that she had moved on, it was that she had never needed him to begin with. Everything she was now, she had always been. He just hadn't seen it. Or worse, he had seen hints of it and dismissed them as anomalies. In that silence, he began hearing every moment he had ignored her. Every time he had talked over her at dinner. Every time he'd introduced her as, my wife, without ever mentioning what she did. Every time she'd gone quiet after he made a joke at her expense, and he'd assumed she was too sensitive. Now, there was only space. And echoes. Meanwhile, Ashley's life unfolded with the kind of rhythm that no longer surprised her. A new consulting partnership with a European cybersecurity firm had been finalized, one that would position her as an international advisor. She had started leading a quarterly roundtable for senior women in data science. She spent her mornings running along the Potomac, her evenings reading on her balcony or reviewing pitch decks from female-founded startups. During a team meeting, one of her London colleagues remarked, "You've been mentioned in 3 different leadership podcasts this week. People are starting to call you the strategist behind the curtain." Ashley gave a small smile. She had no interest in being a celebrity. Her work spoke for itself. That weekend, she traveled to San Francisco for a closed investor session. It was a curated circle, founders, financiers, and futurists discussing where the tech industry would be in 10 years. Ashley's seat at the table was no longer a surprise to anyone in the room. During one of the breaks, an executive from a major VC firm approached her. "I saw your interview with the MIT panel last month," she said. "You made a comment that stuck with me." Ashley raised an eyebrow slightly. "Which one?" "You said, the most underestimated person in the room is usually the one paying attention." Ashley nodded. "It's often true." The woman smiled. "Would you ever consider writing a book?" Ashley tilted her head. "I'd consider it. But only if it's useful, not for vanity." "You wouldn't be the type to write a vanity book," the woman said. "You're too surgical." Ashley laughed gently. "I'll take that as a compliment." After returning home, she found a small stack of letters forwarded from her previous address. Among them was a plain envelope with no return label. Inside, a short note in Derek's handwriting. "I've been thinking about that day. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't gloat. You just told the truth and walked away. That silence has followed me every day since. I see you now. I just wish I had sooner." Ashley folded the note once, then slid it into a drawer beside her desk. She didn't need to reply. That silence he mentioned, she wore it like armor now. The truth didn't need to shout. That same week, she was invited to host a private session with the Department of Commerce on ethical data systems. It wasn't announced publicly, nor did she share it on any platform. But word traveled. It always did. Ashley's name had begun to circulate in government advisory circles, with more than one senior official suggesting she be added to a federal committee on tech reform. Her reputation was no longer just impressive, it was influential. And still, she remained grounded. On Sunday morning, she sat in her apartment with a cup of black tea and a view of the city. No noise. No notifications. She opened her laptop and began drafting a mentorship framework for her advisory board, the one she had designed for women in tech with unconventional career paths. She didn't need recognition to know the value of her voice. She had created impact where no one thought to look for it. And the silence she left behind? It spoke volumes in rooms she no longer had to enter. Lauren stared at the ceiling above her sister's guest room, the white paint unchanging and uncomfortably still. It had been over a month since she left the condo, yet the memory of Ashley's face on that laptop screen remained carved into her thoughts. The image of her ex-best friend standing on that stage, flawless, confident, indisputably powerful, kept replaying in the silence. She had not confronted Derek since that night. He had sent a few apologetic messages, each more desperate than the last, each laced with a plea for understanding. But Lauren couldn't answer them. Not because she didn't have things to say. She had too many. None of which would fix what now loomed between them, the unavoidable realization that she had betrayed someone exceptional for someone ordinary. Her envy had begun in small doses, harmless comparisons, little insecurities. Ashley was the quiet one, but Lauren had always sensed something deeper behind the silence. Still, she'd convinced herself that she had the upper hand in charisma, in beauty, in social grace. She had thought Derek was proof of that. Now, Ashley had something no one could fake, gravity. The kind of presence people didn't just notice, they respected. And Lauren felt, for the first time in years, entirely replaceable. That week, her sister arranged a dinner with a few colleagues at a cozy Italian restaurant in Alexandria. Lauren accepted, hoping for a distraction. She wore her favorite wrap dress and styled her hair meticulously. At the table, she smiled, laughed at the right moments, and tried to play the part of someone who had not been left reeling by her own mistakes. But halfway through dinner, a guest from across the table mentioned Ashley's name. "Did you catch that article in Women Who Build?" the woman said. "Ashley Miller. Brilliant mind. They're calling her the architect behind Stratix's global strategy overhaul." Lauren's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her sister leaned in. "You know her, right?" Lauren blinked, forcing a smile. "We went to college together. Haven't talked in a while." "She's incredible," the woman continued. "You can tell she's the real deal. You don't get to that level by accident." Lauren nodded vaguely but felt the air leave her chest. She made it through the rest of the meal with practiced expressions, but inside, something was unraveling. It wasn't just guilt. It was humiliation. She had underestimated Ashley the same way Derek had, but with more venom. Because she had known better. She had known Ashley was intelligent, kind, deliberate. But rather than respect that, she had viewed it as an opportunity to dominate, to feel superior. And now she was the one forgotten. Unmentioned. Unimportant. That night, alone in her room, Lauren opened her laptop and revisited Ashley's profile. She scrolled through interviews, watched clips of panel discussions, read Q&As that painted a portrait of someone far removed from the girl who used to help her write resumes in their dorm room. This Ashley didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for permission. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who had nothing left to prove. Lauren stared at one particular quote: "You don't need to be loud to take up space. You just need to be consistent." She closed the screen. A few days later, she began updating her own resume, more out of necessity than inspiration. She had been out of the workforce for nearly 6 months, and the gap now looked more glaring with every passing week. She applied to several positions but received few responses. Then, one Tuesday morning, she spotted an opening that caught her breath. A strategic operations role at Stratix, the very company Ashley now helped lead. The job description fit her background. She clicked the application button instinctively, uploaded her documents, filled out the form. A sense of boldness washed over her. Maybe this was a way to start fresh. 2 days later, she received the rejection. Not a form letter. A direct notification. Not recommended. Lauren stared at the words on the screen, heart pounding. Somewhere inside the system, Ashley had seen her name. She didn't have to guess. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even revenge. It was just a door being closed. Deliberately. Decisively. She sat motionless for nearly an hour. It was one thing to be forgotten. It was another to be dismissed, not out of malice, but because she simply no longer mattered. Lauren finally sent one message. Short. Honest. "I never said sorry. You didn't deserve what I did. I hope you know that." She didn't expect a response. Ashley never replied. Instead, Lauren watched her from a distance, through news mentions, through event pages, through whispered admiration from circles she now realized she had never truly belonged to. She saw the invitations Ashley received. The rooms she now entered. The mentorships she fostered. The accolades that arrived without her needing to chase them. And in every silent moment, Lauren came to understand what real loss looked like. It wasn't Derek. It was Ashley. Because losing someone like her didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like history deciding who mattered, and making it clear who never would again. The room buzzed with a low hum of voices, laughter, and glasses clinking against marble countertops. The alumni gathering at the prestigious Carlton Hotel in D.C. had drawn graduates from all over the country, former classmates, now CEOs, attorneys, architects, and entrepreneurs, each eager to network, reminisce, or casually flex the results of their past decade. Ashley walked through the entryway with a composed grace. She wore a charcoal-wrapped dress with understated jewelry and no name tag. Everyone who needed to know her name already did. She had been invited not just as an alumna, but as an honoree. Her contributions to artificial intelligence strategy and ethics had sparked a national initiative adopted by several institutions, including her own alma mater. Her presence at the event was anticipated, respected, even admired. What Ashley hadn't anticipated was who else would be there. Near the center of the banquet hall, under the soft glow of hanging chandeliers, stood Derek and Lauren. They were surrounded by a small group of acquaintances, a few old college faces trying to navigate strained pleasantries. Lauren was dressed impeccably in a pale blue sheath dress, her smile sharp, eyes scanning the crowd. Derek stood beside her, stiff and formal in a navy suit, hands buried in his pockets as if trying to shrink into himself. Ashley's arrival had not gone unnoticed. A whisper passed through the crowd as her name circulated in low, impressed tones. Derek turned just in time to see her glide past the entry table, exchanging a quick handshake with the event coordinator before moving toward the main floor. His throat tightened. Lauren turned too, and though her expression didn't falter, her posture did. Her smile dimmed just enough for Ashley to see the flicker of discomfort. Ashley didn't approach. She didn't need to. Shortly after she arrived, the event organizer stepped onto the raised platform near the back of the hall. He tapped the microphone, calling the room to attention. "If I could have everyone's focus for a moment," he began, smiling at the audience. "Tonight, we celebrate not only the community we built here years ago but the impact our graduates continue to make around the world." He paused, then gestured toward Ashley. "This year, we're proud to recognize one of our own, someone who has fundamentally shaped the conversation around data ethics and responsible AI. She's advised governments, mentored women in tech across continents, and helped redefine how global tech firms approach strategy. Please join me in honoring Ashley Miller." The applause erupted instantly. Ashley stepped forward with practiced calm, her steps deliberate, her expression modest but resolute. She accepted the plaque without hesitation and turned to the audience. She didn't look at Derek. Not once. Her voice rang clear over the microphone, smooth and unshaken. "I'm grateful for this recognition, and even more grateful for what it represents, not just personal milestones, but a shift in how we think about leadership. For too long, success looked like one thing. Sounded like one voice. Now, it's changing. And it's about time." There were nods across the room. Real ones. Not polite. Not patronizing. She stepped down, mingling again with quiet confidence. From the far side of the room, Derek watched. His world had turned inside out. Not because Ashley had succeeded, he had known that from a distance. But because now everyone else knew too. He was no longer the person who had walked away from a weak marriage. He was the man who had failed to recognize brilliance in his own home. As the evening continued, Derek tried to re-engage in conversation, but people kept turning toward Ashley. Every time he spoke, their eyes drifted. When he introduced himself, more than one person responded, "Oh, you're Ashley's ex-husband," their tone curious, their expression subtly tinged with judgment. It was subtle, but not missed. Lauren felt it too. They were no longer the couple people envied. They were a footnote. An awkward presence at the edge of someone else's spotlight. By the time dessert was served, Derek's discomfort had turned visible. His jaw tight. His shoulders tense. He had hoped to rebuild himself in new circles, with new relationships, but Ashley's reputation had followed him here like a mirror he could no longer avoid. Lauren, sensing the shifting attention, tried to pivot. She approached a group discussing tech trends and inserted herself with a bright, "We've been following AI developments too. Derek even led a real estate data project last year." No one responded with enthusiasm. One man glanced at her, then turned to Ashley. Did you help develop that optimization model for StraightX that got integrated by the Canadian ministry? Ashley gave a small smile. I was part of that team, yes. It wasn't boasting. It was simply truth. Derek said nothing. The evening wound down, and guests began filtering out. Ashley took her time leaving, exchanging farewells with genuine warmth, handing out cards when asked. She was the last to exit, by design. She didn't want to create a scene. She wanted to leave a mark. As she stepped into the hallway, Derek approached. His tone was low. Ashley. She turned. He looked at her, not the woman he remembered, but the one everyone else now saw. The one who had never needed him. The one who had moved on with such composure it made regret feel like a punishment. You were incredible tonight, he said quietly. Ashley gave a polite nod. Thank you. He hesitated. I didn't know. Back then. What you were capable of. She met his eyes. That was never the problem, Derek. The problem was that you didn't want to know. And with that, she walked away. No final words. No glances over her shoulder. Just the quiet, unmistakable sound of truth catching up to someone too late to deserve it. The application landed in the recruitment portal on a Thursday morning, flagged automatically by the system's keyword filter. Ashley hadn't planned to check submissions that week. It was normally handled by her team, but a quiet moment between meetings found her scrolling through the dashboard, scanning candidate names out of curiosity. And there it was. Lauren Hastings. Her name stood stark against the page, neatly attached to a well-structured resume and a thoughtfully written cover letter. The position was for a mid-level communications strategist within StraightX's internal operations team, far removed from the executive floor Ashley occupied, but still under her oversight. The irony was instant and sharp. Ashley didn't blink. She opened the file, reviewed the credentials in silence. Lauren's background was respectable. A marketing degree, 5 years of experience in PR and brand messaging, a short stint as a communications consultant. There were no glaring issues. The application was clean. Professional. It was also entirely forgettable. Ashley stared at the screen for a long moment. She didn't feel rage. Not even satisfaction. Just clarity. She remembered the years of friendship, the wine nights in college, the laughter, the whispered secrets under the glow of late-night desk lamps. And then she remembered Lauren's smirk in that Facebook post, arm in arm with a man who had declared Ashley useless just weeks before filing for divorce. Her hand hovered over the drop-down menu in the review column. One click. Not recommended. She moved on to the next application. The decision wasn't revenge. It wasn't pettiness. It was boundaries, clear, firm, and long overdue. Lauren had crossed a line that cost her access, not just to Ashley, but to the network that Ashley now helped shape. 2 days later, during a leadership sync, Ashley didn't mention the application. There was no reason to. She had closed that chapter quietly, just like all the others. But Lauren had not. The rejection email arrived on a Monday morning. Standard language. No explanation. Just a polite decline of interest in moving forward. Lauren stared at it, reading it 3 times before she accepted the truth. Ashley had seen her name. And said nothing. The finality of that silence hit harder than expected. Not because Lauren believed she still deserved something from Ashley, but because she hadn't expected to be dismissed so effortlessly. Her application had been her way of knocking on a door she thought might still crack open if handled delicately. Instead, it was sealed shut. That same week, Ashley was invited to attend a closed summit in Montreal focused on global AI regulation. The summit included academics, policy leaders, and a handful of executive strategists known for their influence across borders. Ashley was one of the youngest in the room, yet she was asked to lead the roundtable on transatlantic data ethics. The event passed with ease. She spoke, advised, listened. Made connections she knew would last. When it was over, she stayed in the city for a few days, walking its quiet streets, letting herself enjoy the distance from Washington's constant buzz. Back home, her team greeted her with an update. One of the interns she had personally mentored had just been accepted into a fellowship at MIT. She said your recommendation changed everything, her assistant told her. Ashley smiled. She earned it. Moments like that mattered more to her now than applause or headlines. Seeing women rise, especially the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, was the real legacy she wanted to leave behind. Later that afternoon, she reviewed a proposal for a partnership with a West Coast startup focusing on responsible automation. Their founder, a 30-year-old Latina engineer named Carmen, had cited Ashley in her TEDx talk as a personal inspiration. The deal wasn't just viable, it was aligned with Ashley's vision of inclusive innovation. She scheduled a call with Carmen for the next morning. In a nearby office, someone mentioned in passing that Stratix had just been included in TechSphere's Top 10 Ethical Innovators of the Year list. Ashley nodded, offered a quiet congratulations to the team, and returned to her desk. It no longer surprised her to be recognized. What mattered more was doing the work right. That evening, as she walked through her neighborhood, a familiar breeze rustled the leaves above. She passed a bookstore, paused, and walked in. On a small table near the center, a sign read, "Women Who Lead." To her surprise, a magazine rested at the top of the stack, and on its cover, her face. The headline read, "Ashley Miller, the strategist reshaping global AI." She picked it up, flipped through the article briefly. The writing was accurate. No sensationalism. Just a clear account of her work, her principles, her impact. She didn't buy it. Instead, she left the store, letting the door close behind her, the sound faint against the quiet street. Her life had become what she once never dared to dream aloud. Not because someone handed it to her, but because she refused to be erased. She wasn't angry at Lauren anymore. Or Derek. They had made their choices. Now, she was making hers. And this time, no one else got to decide the outcome. It was late spring when Ashley stepped off the flight in Florence. The air was soft and fragrant, touched with a faint breeze that carried scents of jasmine and distant stone ovens. She wasn't here for a conference, a panel, or any leadership event. For once, there was no agenda. This trip was a gift to herself. 3 weeks. No scheduled meetings. No laptops at the table. No obligations. Just herself, a small villa tucked into the hills of Fiesole, and a stack of books she had been meaning to read for years but never had the time, or permission, to lose herself in. She arrived at the villa near sunset. The property overlooked a valley of green rolling hills dotted with terracotta rooftops and cypress trees. The villa itself was quiet and modestly elegant, with aged stone walls, worn wooden beams, and ivy creeping up its sides like time itself had given it a gentle embrace. Inside, the host had left a note beside a basket of fruit and a bottle of wine. "May this space bring you silence, strength, and everything you were never allowed to ask for." Ashley smiled as she read it. The next morning, she woke before sunrise, not to the sound of alarms or calendar pings, but to birdsong and the slow warming of the stone floor beneath her bare feet. She brewed coffee in the small kitchen, stepped out onto the terrace, and watched the valley below wake up with her. There were no thoughts of Derek. No reflections on Lauren. They no longer occupied her mind with the weight they once did. Not because she had forced them out, but because peace had made them irrelevant. The days in Italy passed slowly and deliberately. She walked the narrow cobblestone streets, visited small art galleries where no one recognized her name, and spent hours in family-run cafes listening to conversations she didn't fully understand but still found beautiful. She journaled at dusk, painted with watercolors in the early afternoons, and let herself be ordinary in the most luxurious way, unseen, uninterrupted, untethered. On the 10th day, she received an email from one of her ments. The message was simple. "You made me believe I could belong here. Thank you for not letting me shrink." Ashley read it under a fig tree in the villa's back garden, and her chest filled with something that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with purpose. That night, she opened her laptop, not to work, but to begin outlining a new initiative she had been contemplating quietly for months. A mentorship platform, specifically designed for women in technology who came from non-traditional paths. Immigrants. Mothers returning to the workforce. Late bloomers. She'd call it second signal, a nod to the quiet talents overlooked in favor of the loudest voices in the room. By the time she returned to Washington, the framework was complete. Her team welcomed her back with a renewed sense of focus. Ashley delegated more than she used to, no longer driven by the need to control every detail. She trusted her people. She had built that culture herself. The weeks passed with a new rhythm. She spent her evenings with a growing circle of women she now called friends, true ones, not polite companions. They hosted dinners, traded business insights, shared advice on investments, relationships, and therapy. The kind of conversations that didn't orbit around men or gossip, but around vision, evolution, and freedom. One Thursday afternoon, Ashley was invited to a private lunch hosted by a venture group supporting women-led tech startups. She had attended before, but this time, the invitation came with a handwritten note from the chair. "We don't want you to join us. We want you to lead us." She took a long walk after reading it, down the waterfront path by the Potomac. The air was still, and the sky a pale shade of gold. She thought about how far she had come, not just geographically or financially, but spiritually. The woman who once played small to preserve someone else's ego no longer existed. In her place stood someone who needed no validation, no spotlight, and yet carried both when she entered a room. Later that evening, as she prepared dinner in her apartment, she caught her reflection in the kitchen window. The same face. The same eyes. But everything behind them had changed. The greatest wealth she now possessed wasn't her portfolio, her accolades, or her influence. It was the fact that no one, no name from her past, no shadow from old rooms, could disturb the peace she had built. This life wasn't just better. It was hers. Unapologetically. Unshakably. Finally. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting their sterile glow across the wide aisles. It was an ordinary afternoon in the grocery store, carts wheeling past neatly stocked shelves, quiet conversations blending into the hum of background music. Ashley reached for a jar of almond butter, scanning the label with the same quiet attention she gave everything in her life now. Across from her, a colleague from the mentorship program laughed at something she had just said, still clutching a bag of oranges. They had come in together after a late working session, impromptu, relaxed, and without pretense. Ashley wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled into a low bun. She was dressed in jeans and a loose linen shirt. There was nothing about her appearance that shouted success. And yet, she moved like someone who no longer needed to prove anything. She was placing the jar into her basket when she felt it, that subtle shift in the atmosphere. The kind of stillness that only followed recognition. She turned, slow and steady, and there he was. Derek. Standing at the end of the aisle with a plastic basket in one hand and a stunned look on his face. He wasn't wearing a suit this time. Just a simple jacket over a shirt that had lost its shape. He looked smaller than she remembered, not physically, but in the way a statue does when the illusion of grandeur fades. Their eyes met. He froze. Ashley didn't flinch. It had been over a year since they last stood face to face. But she felt nothing now. No anger. No nervous flutter in her chest. No desire for confrontation or conversation. Just calm recognition that the person in front of her had once been her entire life, and now wasn't even a factor in her day. Derek offered a tentative smile, one that stretched across his face like a failed bridge. Ashley didn't return it. Next to her, her colleague kept talking, unaware of the exchange happening just a few feet away. Ashley nodded gently, replying with a low chuckle, her eyes never leaving Derek's. He lifted a hand slightly, an awkward attempt at a wave, then lowered it halfway through, as if realizing mid-motion that the gesture no longer held weight. He opened his mouth like he might speak. But Ashley had already turned back to the shelf, calmly lifting another item into her basket. Derek watched her laugh softly at something her colleague said, watched her walk toward the register without urgency, and without a backward glance. There was no performance. No vindictive pause for him to witness her success. No flaunting of the life she now led. And that, more than any confrontation, any monologue, any carefully worded closure, was what gutted him. Because in that moment, he understood. He was no longer a chapter in her story. He was footnote. She hadn't needed to destroy him to win. She had simply moved forward, and never looked back. Ashley paid at the self-checkout, chatting casually as she scanned each item. As they left the store, her colleague mentioned grabbing coffee next week, and Ashley agreed, making a mental note of her schedule. They stepped out into the golden wash of early evening, the city slowing into dusk around them. Ashley glanced up at the skyline as the wind tugged lightly at her sleeves. For the first time in a long while, she realized something profound. She didn't just have peace. She was peace. A woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, betrayed, and who had responded not with fury, but with evolution. Not with noise, but with purpose. And in that silence, she had built something indestructible. As they reached the corner, her colleague asked, "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" Ashley considered the question, her eyes catching the reflection of passing headlights in a storefront window. "Yes," she said simply. "But I think more about how far I'll go." And she meant it. Because the world she lived in now was one she had forged with her own hands, without shortcuts, without applause, without anyone's permission. And the last expression Derek would ever see on her face, the effortless confidence, the quiet smile, the unwavering presence, was worth more than all the words he never said and all the things he would never have. Because it told him the one truth he could no longer ignore. She had always been extraordinary. He had simply never seen it. Now, everyone else did. And there was no version of reality where he would ever be part of that brilliance again.